Good afternoon. Welcome to this, the 6th European Statistics Day. For those who don't know, we started with a World Statistics Day run by the UN on 2010, the 20th of October 2010. That's repeated every 5 years, 2015 and 2020. In 2016, the European official statistics community decided that we should have a European Statistics Day in the years in between the World celebration. And that started in 2016, and this is the 6th time we've run European Statistics Day, sometimes in parallel with World Statistics Day. Now, today I've invited some of my colleagues from Eurostat along, and we're going to concentrate a little bit on innovation, some of the new things we've been doing and how we're intending to innovate into the future. But first, I'd like to show you a little video.
We encounter data all the time. But do you ever ask what's behind them? Can someone manipulate them? What interests do they serve? Are they accurate or have they been fiddled? Are they trustworthy or have we been fooled? Who should you turn to? Eurostat is the statistical office of the European Union. Working in collaboration with our national counterparts, we publish high-quality official statistics, providing reliable data to help you take informed decisions. Our statistics follow key principles. Independence. No one influences us. Objectivity. We have no hidden agenda. Comparability, allowing you to compare your country or region to others in Europe. Check out Eurostat, your key to European statistics.
Right, so we've got, as I say, a few presentations. Just to give you some ground rules, we've opened up Slido for you to ask questions, and we intend to cover the questions all in one go at the end when our panelists will all be there. So you can ask general questions about Eurostat and our work, or you can ask specific questions about one of the projects that we're going to show you. I'd like to start though first by just giving a quick skim of Eurostat, who we are, what we do. So I'm involved in dissemination of statistics and have been for quite a long time. I have a particular responsibility for sort of the editorial oversight of our output to try and make sure we're coherent and meet the needs of our users. So if we move on to the next slide. Right. So this is European Statistics Day, as I've said, 2010-2021. And the strapline that has been chosen this year is statistics, a vaccine to protect democracy and combat the virus of disinformation. I think we can all judge where the idea for that came from over recent years, and we like to think we've been doing our part to try and tackle disinformation around our areas of work. So the next. So just a quick overview. Our job is to be the statistical office of the European Union. Just as every country has a national statistical office, we work as the European Statistical Office. And we work under the authority of the European Commission, and in particular of the Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, the Italian Commissioner for Economy. He is our Commissioner. And we have a Director General, Mariana Kotseva, a former President of the Bulgarian Statistical Office, a very experienced international official statistician. And we do our job through something we call the European Statistical System. Next. And the European Statistical System is simply a partnership between us, Eurostat, national statistical offices, any other official body in the member states that produces official statistics. Many ministries produce statistics, and we cover all the EU member states, but also we have formal arrangements through various treaties with the EFTA countries who form part of the overall European statistical system. That's Norway, Switzerland, Iceland and Liechtenstein, also heavily involved. Next. And our mission is quite simple. We provide high quality statistics and data for Europe for everybody to use. Next. And our specific job, we define the harmonized methodologies, definitions, classifications, you name it, in collaboration with the member states, with the key goal of ensuring comparability across the EU. The member states collect the data with, you will see later, there are a few exceptions to this, and we've got an example of one of those exceptions to show you later. But in general, the data is collected by the member states, by national statistical offices and ministries. It's sent to us. We gather the data, process it, and we publish EU and Euro area aggregates and data for the member states and the EFTA countries. And all this we do validating the data according to quality criteria. If we look at the next slide, we see that we use agreed standards and methods. We try to cover all EU policy areas. And as we're going to show you, at least in part today, we are constantly exploring new data sources, new techniques in order to improve all aspects of quality. And of course, one of the key aspects of quality is timeliness. So if we look at the next slide, and this is the Bible of quality that I mentioned, the European Statistics Code of Practice. 16 key principles on covering the way we work, the way the institutional environment, the way we produce statistics and the way we disseminate them. And as you see, among these key principles, we've got independence, quality, and impartiality and objectivity. And we monitor, or the application of this code to our work is monitored through various mechanisms. We've got a body that oversees us, an independent body that makes an annual report to the Parliament and Council, known as ESGAB, the European Statistical Governance Advisory Body. And we also have a peer review system where visiting teams of expert statisticians visit each statistical office and Eurostat and examine how we work against the principles of the code. We're into the third round of peer reviews at the moment. The first Eurostat was reviewed a few months ago. I believe the first national review is going on pretty much at this moment, and further reviews will take place over the coming couple of years. All the results will be published, so you can see what these independent teams thought of our way of working and where they made recommendations for improvement. And we will also post the action plans. So if we go on to the next. I also mentioned that we support all the work of the EU with statistics. This is the list of the policies, the priorities of the current Commission, 6 priorities. And for each one, I've just quickly jotted down the first things that came to my mind amongst all the statistics we produce and gather. I've only put each set of statistics down once, though some of them are valid for multiple priorities. But we've got data that can support the work of the policymakers in all the areas of the priorities. And if we move on to the next. So it's one of the key things that people are always saying is show, don't tell. So I won't just talk about how we're innovative and how we can respond to crises. I've invited a number of colleagues along who are going to tell you what we did and show you examples of what we did more specifically. So let's have a look at the next slide. Yeah, that's the end of my little presentation. I'm leaving there with, there were some links there, but what we're going to do now is move on. As you can see, the links, we've got our website where you can find everything. We've got our social media channels. I'm guessing that if you found your way to this presentation, you must be aware of one or other of these, because this is where we advertised and posted. We have a user support service available in many languages, and for journalists we have a media support service, and you please make use of them. So moving on, we've got a number of presentations, but we're going to start first with Emanuela Baldacci, our Director of Resources, whose areas of responsibility also includes methodological and innovation work, and he's going to talk a little bit about the background to innovation in official statistics. So over to you, Emanuela.
Thanks, Tim, and a very good afternoon from Luxembourg to all of you. Also, happy European Statistics Day. We are proudly celebrating the progress we are making in statistics. And as progress is something that is dynamic, we should never stop making progresses. And that's what I want to discuss briefly, providing an overview of the different areas where we are moving into innovation for official statistics to better serve all our users and become even better at filling the information gaps that do exist. The colleagues after me will complement this general overview with more specific examples on how innovation resulted in new statistical information products. But first, let me just say that in official statistics, we are used to innovating. Things have been moving from the times where data were purely collected through surveys, so asking on the ground to people to fill up questionnaires, to using more and more administrative data for the production of statistics. And today, the new frontier is to use the so-called big data or non-traditional data sources that can be drawn from a variety of systems. During the COVID pandemic, this became not just a thing nice to have, but a real necessity, with most of the countries in Europe being locked down and on the ground information systems collection being basically stopped. Countries had to move to different ways of producing statistics by coming up with creative ideas. And this is where the non-traditional sources came quite handy. Obviously, the statistical system had already started about 10 years ago to invest in exploring these data sources and also the methodologies that would be needed to process this data so that we could provide statistical information. What are these new data sources? They have to do with digital data. Everything we do in the digital ecosystem by, for example, navigating and browsing through the internet, or using systems that are based on sensors, for example, or using platforms where we are providing data to which in exchange of services. These are just a few examples. Other examples include the mobile network data that we all again use, or GPS systems that again are part of our daily activities. All these data sources have something in common. First of all, they're new, they're untested for the production of statistics, and secondly, they're not collected for the purpose of producing official statistics. And this is a big difference with respect to the traditional surveys. In a traditional survey, we normally design the questionnaire and we collect the data so that they are serving a purpose. In counting events, for example, or identifying better certain behaviors. But when it comes to these data sources, they are collected for different purposes, typically related to a service that someone has in exchange of it. So the first key question that the statistician assistant has to answer is how to use these sources, how to process them. And this is where the work has been ongoing in the last few years, both in Eurostat and in the rest of the European statistical system, to find the right methods, the right algorithms, as some data scientists would say, that would, on the one hand, allow to process this data together with more traditional sources, extract meaning, insight out of this data, but also make sure that we are sticking to our very high standard in terms of quality. For example, transparency and replicability of results are a key principle that we stick to. And this is important because obviously we don't want to create black boxes out of which data come that we cannot explain. So this is where we are investing a lot. Next slide, please. But let's say methodological research to find the right algorithms that would provide a way to process this data are only one of the areas where we are producing innovation. There are other areas that are equally important. The first one is to gain a secure access compliant with the existing rules to this data, and different types of data, non-traditional data, require different types of agreements with the providers. In the examples that will follow, you will see one of these applications, for example, to the so-called collaborative economy platform becoming a source of statistical information. But when we do this, we are very much mindful of, first of all, the security protocols that need to be applied, because data can only be used for statistical purposes. Secondly, we make sure that we are fully compliant with respecting privacy rules, and that we are agreeing with the providers of the data on the modalities of data transfer. There is a reflection now in Europe on how to move from this voluntary arrangement mechanism to a more binding legal framework. And you may have heard of a piece of legislation called the Data Act that the Commission is working on. In this piece of legislation, there will be also some provision that would try to stabilize and provide a less fragmented legal framework for providing access for statistical purposes to some of this platform data. And then what we do with it is also try to create new information products that are responding to user needs. And in that sense, again, we are using digital technologies, for example, to make our publications, less static, more dynamic, more interacting. We can move to the next slides. These are just visual examples that of what one can do with these new data sources. And I just picked for this presentation an example of scraping information from portals that advertise jobs. This is public information that everybody can consult manually, but if you want to do it with large volumes of data, you need to have a machine behind it, an algorithm that does this at scale. And that with that type of information, for example, you can provide a map of the demand and supply of skills all over Europe and see how this skills mismatch, for example, is happening in some areas versus other areas. So basically another indicator of a labor market. In the next slides, you can also see how this information can be used to improve the prediction and forecasting activities that economists may need to put in place, carry out in their job, and relying on higher frequency data, more timely data that are using also signals coming from these non-traditional sources may help accelerate the delivery of these information products. So basically going faster on the market with information that can also be used for policy decisions and to understand things as they are moving. Again, the example of the COVID crisis is paradigmatic. During the crisis, there was a big need for information about, for example, people mobility. And this is where some statistical offices were exploring the possibility of using mobile network operator data to have a first, let's say, estimate of whether the COVID restrictions measures were really preventing people from moving and spreading potentially the virus. And this is an example of how, let's say, new data sources combined with good methods can be used also to provide new types of information almost real time. In the next slides, you can also see how this information can be used to be more granular at the geographical level for any country. So you can have a bigger level of detail of the data that can allow you, for example, to explore the links between the statistical information and the geographical information. And finally, in the following slide, you can see that one can build also more interactive products or apps that are intended to give the users the control on the type of information that they visualize. So these have been developed in some cases, both as experimental products and in some cases also, let's say, being disseminated. And they give the possibility to the user to be in the driver's seat, to choose the visualization, the combination of information that they want to see, and possibly move from a static consumption of statistical information to a more dynamic type of use of this information, responding to questions as opposed to purely showing tables. Finally, another area where the innovation, and you can go to the next slide, please, is quite important is in putting all this new information, both on the methods that we use, the algorithms, but also the data, in the hands of users, so that the users can either use and visualize the information or even reuse and combine this information with other types of data, for example, to build visual representation, infographics, develop new apps that could serve different purposes, where statistical information is one of the ingredients of the app. And to do that, we have been extending the set of information that we are disseminating through open data channels. We are facilitating the work of those who have to read this data in large volumes by allowing machine to machine, so automatic transmission of this data without the need for a human intervention for those that are using, for example, APIs and other technical software that can be adopted for these purposes. And we are also exposing in repositories that are widely used by developers the code, so the software that we use and that it's implementing the statistical methods. And this is because we believe strongly in the transparency and replicability of the results. We believe strongly in the partnership with the statistical and scientific community to make progress in all these areas. And the last slide shows where what I think is the key product that comes out of these exercises. You can look it up more in depth if you go on the experimental statistics page on the Eurostat website. It's a series of experimental products. They are experimental because they either use new methods or new data sources that have not been consolidated yet, but we still want to have the opinion and feedbacks of the users, whether the products are useful, they respond to a policy or an information need, or whether the methods can be improved. And this is why we put this information out, both to be used, as I said, but also to collect the feedbacks and to collect ideas for improvement. And I would encourage you to go and consult some of these products because they have, let's say, added the information either in terms of details, so higher frequency information, or they cover areas that are normally not covered by traditional statistics, or they have been implementing new methods and new data to produce information at a higher level of detail or faster, and produce so-called leading indicators or indicators that anticipate the developments in certain areas. So I'm pretty sure that with the colleagues delving in with the details, you will also see more concretely how all these, let's say, developments are leading to more and better statistics. But I want to conclude with a general message. As you have seen in the motto for the European Statistics Day, we are there to serve users, and innovation for us is not an end in itself. We are not a research organization. We want to innovate our products because we want to give responses. So it's very important that we also collect feedbacks from the users, and this is an opportunity to have a dialogue with you and exchange your views on these topics. Thanks, Tim, and back to you.
Thank you, Emanuela. Before we move on to the next presentation, I just again would remind you about Slido. We put the link in the various posts about the live streaming. The link's just under the live stream and should be visible. If you don't have the link, you can go to slido.com, and the code of this event is, if I've got it correct, 635615. 635615, but you should find the link and the code on our website on the page with the live stream. Okay, we'll now move on to a couple of practical examples of what we like to think are good innovative products. Firstly, we have John Verinder, who is Deputy Director for economic statistics. He's also the head of unit for national accounts methodology and key indicators. And he's going to talk to us about a product that we put together in response to the COVID crisis. John?
Thank you very much, Tim. So good afternoon, everybody. We're going to have a look through actually our response statistically to the COVID pandemic. As in all areas of life, the COVID pandemic also impacted on statistics, of course, but in two different respects, I suppose. The first one was the impact on how we produce our statistics. It's much harder to ask somebody in the street questions in a questionnaire under COVID conditions. Similarly, it's hard to collect prices from shops and other outlets under COVID conditions. So here's one aspect where the statistical community had to respond quickly in order to keep the production of our existing statistics running, and in many cases having to innovate in finding new ways to collect data because the existing channels were closed or heavily restricted by COVID. But on the other side, and as Emanuele just said, we also had a very strong user demand for the data, and not just for our existing statistics and how to interpret them in times of COVID, but also the development of new data, faster data, in fields of statistics where traditionally Eurostat and the National Statistical Institutes were less active, such as the area of health statistics. So in a sense, a lot of different statistical areas were innovating. They had to find new sources. They were looking at new indicators. At the same time, we were thinking about how to present the range of statistics which are relevant to monitor the impact of the COVID pandemic, not just on the economy and not just on businesses, but also more broadly on the wider population within the member states. So the idea was born to have a European Statistical Recovery dashboard. In fact, a number of national statistical institutes already worked on dashboards at national level. We wanted to learn from that, but we also wanted to bring together a resource covering all countries. And hence we have the recovery dashboard that was born. The first question, of course, is what to include in the dashboard, what indicators, what statistics should we put there? We don't want too many, otherwise we risk submerging the users in too many statistics. But we want to cover a broad range of impacts on the economy and society. At the same time, we also need a modern and innovative way of presenting the data that we have in a very usable way. So the recovery dashboard combines both of these aspects, and we launched it at the end of last year, and it's produced monthly, and I'll explain why in a second. So here we have the recovery dashboard. We want to work out which indicators to populate it with. We're looking really for, obviously, statistics. We're not necessarily in the business of chasing all of the very real-time indicators that some newspapers and other outlets were using, such as Google Mobility, for example. But we were interested in statistics, both experimental statistics, as Emanuele explained, but also more traditional statistics. We wanted statistics that would have a good time series. That means that we could see how they developed before the COVID pandemic. So it's much easier to see in the recovery phase and compare it with a back period of consistent data. The other issue is we need it to be timely, so it needs to be at least monthly or quarterly statistical indicators. And we have to cover all countries. So we have to have consistent data over time, and we also have to have comparable data between countries. And this was the challenge. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and you will be able to see, hopefully now, the broader dashboard that we have developed. So as you can see, you can find this from the Eurostat website. It's very prominently linked on the front of the Eurostat website. And here we have the range of indicators which have been selected in the dashboard. And as you can see, we've divided up those indicators into economy and prices, business and trade, and people and work. So we've tried to group them depending on the interest of the user. However, this page, the front page, contains all of the indicators. I'll quickly scroll down so you can see the indicators concerned. You can also, in the background, go and play with the dashboard yourselves. And here are all the indicators, and the color coding indicates the broad area from which those indicators come. And as we see on the front page, we wanted first of all to focus on the developments at European Union level. So as you see from these charts and from these headline data, we actually focus very much on the EU, the European Union level here. But the idea of this presentation is that we can burrow down into the data in more detail. And let's take an example. Let's have a look at inflation, which is very much in the newspaper headlines at the moment, mostly, as you can see, because here we have very broad range of inflation. I have selected some countries to put onto the chart. So we have the EU chart here, and as you can see, it's an interactive chart, so we can follow the data points. But also I have selected Belgium and Denmark as country examples, and it's possible to add and subtract countries as you wish. So let's imagine that I'm more interested in Bulgaria and Croatia. I can then add Bulgaria and Croatia to the chart, and I can have a look at the evolution over time. This, of course, is a limited time series. We want to focus on the period from the pandemic hitting in early 2020. And here we have the developments since then. So we can, of course, make the time series longer. I can use this bar. I won't do it now, but we can have a longer look at the time series and see how inflation has developed since the last global financial crisis in 2009-2010. We can also have information here about the data. What are the data? We also have a number of different ways of sharing or downloading the information. So here, for example, we can download the graph to be reused. We can go through Facebook, or we can go through Twitter. We also have the ability to download the data set underlying this indicator. So it's an interactive chart, but behind it, there's a lot of other information around. And the big challenge for us was actually to make it accessible and actually interpretable. So the main message here is the rate of consumer price inflation has varied enormously over time. You can see here for the different countries compared with the EU. However, recently in everywhere, prices have been rising due to energy prices, due to supply bottlenecks, and the other reasons that the economists tell us. So that's an example of inflation. Now, one of the nice things about this dashboard is that when I pick another indicator, such as GDP, it retains the countries that I'm interested in. So I can add countries and I can go around and have a look at all the indicators, and I will always keep my country selection, but of course I can change it anytime. The other thing which is interesting is the question of how are we doing since the start of the pandemic? Many people, for example, for GDP are asking, when are we going to get to the same level of GDP as before the pandemic? When are we going to recover to the same level? And so here, for example, we can select an index. And that index will show us that when the pandemic hit, that's broadly here, let's say, and here are the indexed levels of GDP all the way through. So we can see that unfortunately we still haven't recovered yet to the pre-pandemic levels. So this is another way of visualizing the data. So overall, you can see the types of indicators we have, and we produce this dashboard monthly. So here you can see that this is the October edition. In fact, it was published yesterday. Why do we only produce it monthly? It's because, first of all, a lot of these indicators are monthly and quarterly indicators. So there's not so much variation day by day. And secondly, we actually prepare what's called a commentary. And this commentary gives, shall we say, an overall picture across all indicators. So I do encourage you, if you want to have a look at the commentary. It will isolate, it will focus in on the interesting developments in some indicators and linking them together. The final part of my presentation is really to focus on the innovative part of this dashboard in the sense of the indicators, because there are some indicators on this list that did not exist or did not properly exist before the pandemic, but they have been developed as part of the demand from users. So let us pick some of these indicators as we go through the list. Excess mortality is a very, very high profile indicator, and basically is the answer to the question of how has the pandemic impacted on mortality rates, but total mortality rates compared with the past. So we can guess, of course, that COVID unfortunately has raised mortality rates in many countries, but at the same time, there are other reasons for mortality which may have been impacted by COVID as well. For example, access to hospitals and emergency care. So this issue of excess mortality has been developed to give us an overview of how far are we from normal in terms of mortality levels in the EU and across different countries. And it's a very high profile indicator and very much welcomed by users. Another area which we've developed is on business registrations and bankruptcies. And here we're interested in what new businesses are being created and what businesses are going bust. And I think both of those aspects are really important during this pandemic, particularly as COVID support schemes by governments are introduced and then they are unwound. As you can see as well, we also have this indicator. I'll focus on this, number of flights. This is interesting because it comes from data from Eurocontrol. Eurocontrol, of course, is the European agency responsible for air traffic control. So this is a very much a non-traditional data source. We're not asking the airlines, we're actually taking a big data source directly from a central point and turning it into statistics in an area which has been, as you can see, very heavily impacted. So even in September, the number of flights in Europe was still 33% down on the number of flights pre-pandemic. So really still a long way to go on flights. And finally, just to flag up to you the labour market. We're interested in how people are transitioning from unemployment to employment to inactivity. And we want to split that up and see how these movements are going on. Yes, we can look at the unemployment rate, but actually, or the employment rate, but actually what we're interested in is the mobility between all these streams. And finally, and just to draw attention, we also have an indicator for the tourism sector. And of course, as you can see, the tourism sector is one of the areas we've identified as being very heavily impacted by the pandemic. So here we have a more traditional statistic, which is tourism nights, and that's collected in a statistical manner by the member states. But shortly, you're going to hear about the innovative work on this to try to get faster and more data from a different source to monitor this. That's it in a nutshell. Thanks very much for listening. It's been a pleasure to present the European Statistical Recovery Dashboard to you this afternoon. And I'll hand back to Tim.
Thank you, John. Yes, so as John said, we've got a third presentation, and I think this is particularly interesting. not that they're not all very interesting, but in this one, we're showing the use of an innovative data source. We're showing collaboration beyond traditional statistical sources, and we have already turned it into published data. We've already done news releases on this data, and there will be more to come. So this is us taking and using an innovative source and actually publishing statistics on it. And to talk about what we've done, we've got Simon Blay and Christophe de Munter, who are members of our tourism statistics team. Over to you.
Thank you, Tim. I'm Simon, and together with my colleague Christoph, I'm going to give you just a quick overview over the project that we have launched in 2018 about short stay accommodation booked via collaborative economy platforms. Now, as Tim has mentioned, this is an example of a new way of producing official statistics, where instead of the traditional way where we use surveys or similar tools, we go directly to the owners of the data, in our case, private companies, and obtain the data from them and get mixed statistics out of this. Next slide, please. Let me just start with a few brain teasers or a few snippets from the data. Did you know that Paris was the city with the most bookings on collaborative economy platforms in 2019? Most bookings means that in 2019, over 15 million nights were spent in the City of Lights in apartments booked at one of the 4 platforms, which are Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia Group, and TripAdvisor. Next slide, please. Looking more at the regional level, more than half of the total stays that we've recorded were booked in only 3 countries. So we're covering 31 countries, which is the EU 27, plus the EFTA countries, Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Iceland. And from these 31 countries, France, Spain, and Italy were the most popular, with more than half of the total stays in just these 3 countries. And within those countries, the most popular regions were along the Mediterranean coast, as you'll see in more detail later. Next slide, please. In 2019, we had more than 550 million guest nights that were spent in apartments booked at Airbnb. And this translates to around 50 million bookings. Maybe I should explain the terminology a bit. We have, I'll just give you an example. If you go today on Airbnb or Booking or any other platform and you book a trip to Venice for 3 nights together with your partner, that's 1 booking, 3 nights, and 6 guest nights, because each night is 2 persons. So that means if you have 550 million guest nights in 2019 and 50 million bookings, that means the average stay has 10 or 11 guest nights. And the 50 million bookings, that means that around 100 were booked each minute. Next slide, please. We know this because of, and there you can basically see the graphical representation of the data at regional level, guest nights. And we know this because, next slide, please. Because of this project or this agreement with 4 major accommodation platforms, Airbnb, Booking.com, Expedia, and TripAdvisor, which we launched in 2018, and where we published the first results for the years 2018 and 19 just a few months ago in June. And now my colleague Christoph is going to walk you through some of the background, how it came to pass, and what the scope of the project is.
Yeah, good afternoon. I think Simon managed to grab your attention by giving away some of the results right away. As Simon said, I'm going to give some background information on, why we are doing it, with whom we are working, what kind of data we have, and most important, probably where you can find it and when you can expect the next results. Next, please. Yep. The origin of the project comes from our work in tourism statistics, where, as was mentioned several times, we have traditional sources. It's basically business surveys from hotels, campsite owners, and so on, who report on a monthly basis on arrivals and nights spent at their facilities. There is, however, a segment that was traditionally underrepresented in the statistics, which is the short-term rentals, often very small players, often even households renting out a room. In the past, the trade-off was basically that the cost of collecting this kind of data didn't outweigh the additional quality would get in the data. Basically, we could live with a few percentage of missing data, knowing that it was a tremendous burden on respondents and on statistical systems to get the data. And now what changed the past 10, 15 years, people make their facilities available on internet platforms, people book there. So we all leave a digital footprint. And the good thing of digital footprints is that you can use them for other purposes, for instance, statistics. So that's what we try to do now. So basically, one of the reasons is that we want to improve or make the tourism statistics more complete than it was in the past, in a way that is much more cost efficient and burden neutral than in the past. Secondly, this segment of collaborative economy is also a point of focus for policymakers in its own right. So just the data that Simon just showed on the how many nights are actually booked through these platforms and so on. This is also, I mean, apart from tourism users, also people monitoring the markets, the markets, collaborative economy, competition, and so on, are interested in this data. A byproduct, and Emanuele also pointed out the importance of using news sources for statistics. This project is also some kind of pioneering project in exploring the sharing of privately held data for statistical purposes. So we cooperate with these 4 platforms for a concrete reason, for concrete output. And so this was successful so far, and we managed to collect data that was previously very difficult to collect, namely for all these small players. Also, this is just one small part of the collaborative economy. Eurostat and the partners in the member states are also making efforts to measure other segments of the collaborative economy. Next, please. I think Simon already name dropped the 4 companies we're working up. It's Airbnb, Booking, Expedia, and TripAdvisor, which are supposed to be the major international players in this world of online tourist accommodation or booking tourist accommodation through platforms. There may be other players, in particular at national level. One of the next phases of the project will also be to expand to these national players, but it's all work in progress. Another thing that was mentioned at the very beginning is that traditionally the national statistical offices do all the field work and send the data to Eurostat. This is actually an example where this governance is somehow inversed and Eurostat is the central hub. We collect the data from these 4 platforms because this is the most efficient way to do it. And we will, of course, share the merged data with the statistical offices so they can use it for their national publication. In terms of coverage of countries, as Simon already mentioned, that we're covering the entire EU plus the 4 EFTA countries. And I come back to it as well in the next slide. It's about holiday rentals, so apartment rooms, houses, and so on, the things you typically book on these platforms. What type of data do we have available? It's a bit a mirror of what we have in traditional tourism statistics or in traditional accommodation statistics. It's data on capacity and occupancy. The examples that Simon showed all relate to capacity, so it's about nights spent, stays, a number of guest nights. And you heard the example of how we calculate these things based on this weekend in Venice. On the other hand, there's also data on the number of hosts, the number of listings, and so on. This is not yet published, and there's a methodological reason behind this. We could talk about it for a long time, but it's basically that a listing can be available on more than one platform. People advertise their listings on as many platforms as possible to reach out to as many potential clients as possible. So we cannot simply add up the data from the 4 platforms because there would be double counting. For the other data on the night spent, this is not a problem because you can make the transaction only with one platform, even if it's available on 4. For a given night, you can only book with one of them. So this is why the capacity data, and there's of course also a user interest in the number of listings per city and so on. This we cannot publish yet. In terms of geographical coverage, it's the typical breakdowns by nuts regions. But now we also publish data at cities level because tourism is often a very local phenomenon and cities data is of high relevance. So we have data for about 250 European cities. There's also a few breakdowns linked to the facilities themselves, whether it's shared facilities or whether it's an entire dwelling, whether it's facilities with with fewer than 10 bed places or 10 or more bed places. What we haven't got, it's data on turnover and prices. This might come in the future, but definitely not in the short term. The output, and Simon will come back to the output in a moment. It's also mirrored from the traditional tourism statistics that we have been releasing for whatever 20, 30 years. Just because it's also about creating a level playing field with the platforms. They did not want to be more visible in the data than, for instance, the traditional players. On the other hand, they want to be as visible. And finally, because I mentioned the hotels, it's important to know that the data that we currently publish and what Simon showed and we'll come back to in a minute, it's only covering the segments of the accommodation sector relating to holidays and short stay accommodation. Basically, it excludes hotels and it excludes campsites and separate establishments. So when you hear that we are cooperating with Booking, Booking only sends us the data regarding this holiday rentals, so not on hotels. Again, this could be a future extension of this kind of cooperation, but it's just to be clear about the scope for now. I think this was it for my part. Now we can turn back to Simon to show you some of the more exciting things, namely the results. Thanks.
Thank you, Christoph. Just before I show you some highlights from the data itself, where can you actually obtain this data? We have a website, an experimental statistics hub, where you can basically find everything. The link itself is now available on Slido, I believe. And if it's not, it's very easy to find. You just Google for Eurostat and add the name of one of the platforms, and it should be one of the top 2 or 3 search results that you get. And on this website, you can access the statistics in various formats. There is an Excel file there are 2 Excel files, one for 2018, one for 2019, that you can download. And there's also a wiki article if you'd like a more guided experience, which is basically a text accompanied by graphics, which I believe was also one of the questions that came through Slido. So there's various formats. And in the near future, probably towards the end of the year or the beginning of 2022, we will also have the data available in the traditional format in Eurobase as a data set where you can download and manipulate it. But this is not yet available. This is coming. Moving on to the next slide. I already mentioned earlier the top regions. And here you can see the top 20 regions in the EU27 plus the 4 EFTA countries. And you can see that almost all of them are in the Mediterranean area. So I highlighted the top 10 regions on this map for you. Number 1 is Andalusia, followed by the Croatian Adriatic coast, followed by Catalonia. And then we have the Provence. So those 4 are all at the Mediterranean. And then the first one that is actually not there is Ile-de-France, which is where Paris is located. And if you expand it a bit further to the top 20, basically the first region that is not in one of those 5 countries that you see here, Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, and Croatia. The first one is in rank 19, Budapest, with 7.5 million guest nights in 2019. Next slide, please. moving on to the cities. Here I show you the cities with the highest number of guest nights that were booked. I already mentioned Paris in the introduction. And the next 4 cities are Barcelona, Lisbon, Rome, and Madrid. And then there come a few cities that are not in one of the 5 most popular countries. Budapest is showing very highly, Prague, Vienna, then also Berlin is somewhere in the top 20. So here the picture is a bit more varied. I already told you where you can find this data. Now, as a final information that we would like to give you is what our plans are for the next months or the next half a year, basically. We had this first release, which is basically what this presentation was based upon. That happened just before summer. In the end of June, we published this data for 2018 and 2019. We will soon, so in November or early December, we will publish annual and monthly data for 2020 in the same format. So there will be another Excel file, and we will update the experimental statistics wiki article. And then you can see that for some mysterious reason, bookings dropped sharply in 2020. You can see this for yourself. And then finally, as I already mentioned, towards the end of this year or beginning of next year, we will start with the regular quarterly release of the data through the channels that I've mentioned before, but also directly via Eurobase. And that will be quarterly. That means we're on 2 separate tracks here. The first data releases at country and capital city level will happen relatively quickly after the reference quarter. So something like 60 days or a bit more in the beginning, probably. And more granular data at regional and city level will be delayed then by 6 months. So as an example, if you're interested in Q1 22, you can expect the granular data for Q1 22 to arrive in Q4 22. That's it from my side. You can ask questions via Slido, and we'll also be around for the Q&A session. But apart from that, if you have feedback later or comments, additional questions, please shoot us an email. That's it from my side. Thank you, and see you at the Q&A.
Thank you, Simon and Christoph, and thank you to all 4 of our panelists. What we're going to do now is go into a Q&A session. Slido continues to run, so you can continue to pose questions in Slido and they'll be fed through to us. What I'll do is I've got one eye on the channel, so I'll read out questions. I'll try and direct them to the appropriate person, though if I get it wrong or if somebody, one of the other panelists has an input, jump in and help answer. So the first question I think we've answered, that the fact that the experimental statistics is an Excel file, and I would appreciate having a text supported by graphs. Yes, I think as Simon has just showed you, we do these wiki style articles which are exactly that: text, graphs, tables, and lots of supporting links all in one place, and they'll be updated regularly, so you can read all about this statistic as well as look at the Excel file. The second question was, can we download the slides? And there we are suggesting that if you would like a copy of any or all of the slides, if you contact us through Eurostat media support, the support email address is on our website, and we replied on Slido. So yes, you can ask us to send you the slides. The third question is, what did you use? Tableau ? I suspect that's related to the dashboard. I don't know if John remembers all the technical details. The dashboard was a joint product. John John's team were in charge of the what you could call the statistical side, selection of indicators, writing the commentary, and teams I work with were in charge of the technical side, which was creating the technical side of the dashboard. And from what I remember, what we basically used was a lot of open source JavaScript libraries. So we've been working on visualization tools for a few years now, and we have at hand a number of useful open source libraries that we use for producing various visualizations. So it's obviously some HTML formatting and some JavaScript. John, I don't know if there's anything else you can add to that about the way we made the dashboard.
No, that's correct, Tim. We tried to go open source as much as possible. In fact, it's an interesting question. Perhaps what we should do is put a little information button just to help people to understand where the tool comes from. There was a lot of iterative steps, though. I mean, we consulted with users to get some feedback. We made improvements, we made changes. This led us to more open source software to help us to do different things in the tool. So it was really a kind of iterative process to do that. Thanks.
And Emanuela also, obviously, as one of Emanuela's hats is he's our head of computing. So
just to taking this a bit forward, because the Commission and Eurostat is part of the Commission is a strong proposer of going open source when this is possible. We do have an open source strategy that we comply with. And the main reason why we prefer open source when we are in a position to do so is that others can benefit and reuse what we are doing. So this is also an invitation to see the possibility not just of reusing the data, but in some cases also reusing the tools and expanding on the tools that we are developing and that we are making available to the broader community. Thanks.
Thanks. Yes, I just add two other little points. We have in fact made the dashboard tool available to some national statistical offices, which we were able to do because we used all open source. And as John said, we adopted a sort of progressive implementation strategy. We didn't spend 9 months trying to get it perfect. We came up with a decent prototype as quickly as possible, put it live, collected responses and improved it month by month as we went along. Okay, next question we've got, again about the dashboard tool. In the dashboard tool, do we have the possibility to download the graph once I have done my selection? And
the answer is yes. When you go to a chart, I'm not going to re-show it now, but when you go to a chart, you can select the countries that you're interested in using the country select button. So you can pop more countries onto the graph. And then in the top right, there's actually a little button that allows you to download the graph, including the countries you've selected, into a separate shareable file format. So yes, you can download that. If you want the underlying data to put the data into another graphical software that you're interested in, you can also get access with 2 clicks to the data set so that you can just take out the data and pop it into your own graphical tool if you wish.
Thank you. The next one, again about the dashboard. Comment, this recovery dashboard is great. We need a climate change version. Well, I can say again that the team are currently working on a European Green Deal dashboard. I'm not sure what the deadline for delivery is. I think it may be sometime next year, but yes, we're working on a Green Deal dashboard. And in fact, the success of the recovery dashboard has led us to think that we will probably have an increasing number of dashboards in the coming years built in similar fashion. But one around the Green Deal is certainly coming soon. Question 6, which is for Christoph and Simon. I was wondering how you did it. The platforms seem really jealous of their data. Can you sum up 18 months of negotiations in 5 minutes?
I hope to do it in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
No, it's true. Let's say that the sharing economy, it's not so much about sharing the data about it, actually. So it was, I mean, just to say from the very beginning, when we thought it was a good idea to try to exploit this platform's data, the first thing you do is to try to get in touch with people there. And there's no such thing like info@airbnb.com where you get a footbit in between the door. So it's basically what was a trigger was actually the contacts of our colleagues in DG GROW, the Commission Director General that also works on tourism policy, their contacts with the industry. So via our, let's say, policy colleagues, we got in touch with the platforms. Through these people, we got in touch with the data people in the platforms. And then, as you said, these 18 months started. I mean, we have experience with basically negotiating with countries, with national statistical offices on drawing up statistical programs. This was to a large extent similar, but also specific, because what in the end triggered the success so far, if I can say so, was that on both sides, everybody was involved. When as statisticians talk to the data people, we all like the idea of sharing data, but then the other departments of the platforms come in and that this discussion stops. So by involving the legal people, the contracts people, data protection people in the platforms, even public policy people, this multidisciplinary approach really led to what we have now. Why they are in it, sometimes you wonder. I mean, I tried to explain in the first slide I showed what the interest is for us. For them, I mean, there's nobody from the platforms here, so unfortunately we cannot ask them directly. But what we suspect for them to be the reason, it's, well, basically this whole thing about corporate social responsibility. They do feel the pressure of sharing this kind of data for their public image to show that they are willing to cooperate with the authorities, because, you know, these platforms are quite often under fire for all kind of reasons. Another thing is also the visibility, just to be represented in the official statistics. I mean, we have data on hotels, on campsites, and so on. This segment seems to be underrepresented. So if they want to show their importance to the policy world, of course, it's good to be represented in the official data. And maybe finally, while I mention official data, there's lots of data going around on these platforms, often spread around by groups with specific interests to support the platforms because they're interested in increasing tourism, or to, let's say, not to support the platforms because they have concerns about the residential housing market and so on. So the platforms are probably also happy to have their data in an official source that is objective and impartial, like the Eurostat data. So we cooperate with them. I mean, we do validate the data. We do test the data if what we receive from them is it makes sense. So I think these are, in maybe it was 5 minutes, roughly the reasons.
Emanuela, I think you have something to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity again to stress a more general point that goes in the direction of what the Commission is working on to make examples like the one that was just presented more and more frequent and based on a legal framework that would ensure transparency, compliance with rules, level playing field among the different players. So basically, scaling up what we have just been demonstrating to be a successful partnership. And this is in the context of an initiative that the Commission launched last year. It's called the European Data Strategy. The Commission has already tabled one legal proposal, the Data Governance Act, and will present its proposal for a Data Act by the end of the year. So the work is quite advanced there. In this proposal, there will be also an area that is related to so-called business to government for statistics data sharing. In other words, having a framework, a legal framework that would underpin the possibilities of exchanging data from platforms or other privately held data owners to statistical authorities, with all the conditions that obviously will ensure that the data are treated with care, in compliance with privacy, security, and other aspects that are going to be part of the regulation. That's quite important because for us this will be an opportunity eventually to go on a much bigger scale and let's say really exploit larger volumes. So multiplying the cases that we are exposing today to a bigger number. So that's an initiative that I believe if you are interested in statistics and the future of statistics, you will need to follow up very closely. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you, Emanuela. I think you've largely answered another question, which was, is there any other upcoming initiative to include digital data set possibilities in our official statistics? I'm not sure if we can name specific data sets, you know, the next such data set that will go live. But I mean, you can get an idea of the areas that we're working on by looking at our experimental statistics page. And as Emanuela says, there is an awful lot of work going on to establish a sound framework within this sort of statistics can be developed and introduced. We have a more specific question on how many people are working on the tourism project. Christoph or Simon, I think Christoph said he could answer this.
Yeah, we're basically here. No, in fact, there's a tourism statistic team in Eurostat, but this is the team that deals with all the data coming from the member states. Let's say the traditional business as usual that Eurostat is used to. But as a side project, like, I mean, you know, a lunch break hobby project, this came up some years ago. It became more serious. So it's basically Simon working full-time on the project and another colleague who's not here who's working on the data validation, because the data sets we receive from the platforms are huge to the extent that the first files we received, Eurostat's data systems were not capable of receiving those files. So it's a huge amount of data we receive. And I'm partly also working on the project. So let's say 2 to 2.5 people are working on this. And now it's of course a setup phase. Once it becomes regular production, this may change.
Okay. The next question, I think, possibly for me, and then Emanuela, I think, can chip in afterwards. But the question is, who is the target demographic for the database? The visualization tools are useful for a layman, but an average person wouldn't benefit from the data in general. Collaborative economy. I think we have tried to research our users. We try to think hard about our users, and I'll let you into a sort of small secret. Once when we spoke to a branding agency about Eurostat and how we're perceived, they said, but you don't target your audience. You know, you try to do everybody, and the answer is yes, we do try to do everybody because we have to. Everybody. I mean, to be blunt, everybody contributes to funding us. Every citizen is entitled to our data. So we don't try and produce content just for economic specialists or just for journalists or just for anybody. We try to produce a range of outputs that between them meet the needs of all our actual and potential audiences. So it is true that the database maybe is for more specialist users, for more specialist analysts, for people who want to dig into it and create their own graphs. But then our visualization tools are for more general users. Our various written content is written at we hope is an understandable level for a reasonable user. Statistics Explained brings together text and graphs in one place. We have a section there called Statistics for Beginners, where we try to explain the background to what we do in a way that's more pedagogical. We also work with statistical literacy. We have amongst other things we're doing today for European Statistics Day, we're launching, I think is the 4th running of our European statistics competition for schools, which has grown in success year by year. So yeah, yes, it's true. The demographic for the database may be more expert users, but we've got our other tools are aimed at all sorts of users. I don't know if anybody else wants to chip in with a view on that. Emanuela or no?
No. I mean, I think you covered completely the approach. We are differentiating the products so that we are facilitating the consumption of the statistical information that may be pertinent for one particular theme to the different users. No, what I wanted to mention is that there may be also, in addition to, let's say, more general users, layman type, also more sophisticated, technically wise users that may want to dig even further into methodological aspects. And that's why we curate also the metadata, the methodological information. This is particularly the case on experimental statistics, because these statistics have something new, and we want to expose in a very transparent way the processes, the methods, the algorithms, because we want to consult. And this is obviously not for everyone, but it could be for those who are more interested in the technical aspects and the statistical aspects.
Okay, we've got another one which I think falls into my area a bit, which is data journalism is really powerful. What do you think about bringing it closer to European newsrooms? All I can say to that is yes, please. We are big supporters of data journalism. We've done a couple of seminars with journalists. One live, one virtual. We've tried to establish a network of data journalists. We try to collaborate with data journalists, and we can only agree that data journalism is a powerful tool, and the tools that are in people's hands, in journalists' hands, do enable a greater synergy between the data and the news. John, I may have missed you. You had your hand up. Yes.
Yeah, Tim, I think, based on the last question as well, what we've seen with the recovery dashboard and some of these indicators is they are interpreted by data journalists and other commentators, and they are presented in, shall we say, a more consumable or an easier way. So in a sense, Eurostat tries to solve a lot of the problems of getting the message across and dealing with different constituencies of users. But at the same time, we are also dealing with intermediaries who can help spread that message in a suitable way. And we've seen that with the recovery dashboard already.
Yeah, yes. Okay, rolling on, other questions. I mean, Simon and Christoph pointed out to me in chat that we already have other dashboards. We've got the SDG report, particularly in relation to the question about climate change dashboards. The SDGs have a lot to do with climate change, Sustainable Development Goals. Just in case you're not familiar with the TLA, three-letter acronym. And yes, we have a report and a dashboard for SDGs. We have, and we also have, there is also a tourism dashboard coming that's being worked on. So dashboards are coming, and we've got some already, many more are coming. Okay, so then the next question is that tourism data are available in real time on platforms. Why such a lag to publish it, and why are they available only on quarterly basis? So Simon, I think, offered to answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy, and thanks for the question. Basically, it's a number of reasons. Firstly, yes, the data is created live, basically, but the first step is for the platforms to aggregate it and send it to us, which takes them some time, where we have no influence basically on the speed that they create the data and send it to us. Then secondly, those companies have reporting obligations, and basically the earnings for each quarter they have to report on those. I think, I'm not an economist, but I think it's around 45 days after the reference quarter. So if we take the example of Q1 22, which is the data from January through March, they will report on those on the figures in mid-May, if I'm not wrong. And then only after that, they will send the data to us. Then secondly, we're getting the data from 4 individual platforms, and we have to run internal validation checks on those to make sure that we're not publishing complete rubbish. And we also have to aggregate the data because, of course, we're not publishing data on just Airbnb alone or just TripAdvisor alone, but we're publishing aggregate data for the combined numbers from those 4 platforms.
Thank you, Simon. And then question 12. Did the COVID-19 pandemic change anything in official statistics? Data availability has been discussed all round. So Emanuela, I think, volunteered to take 12, but I suspect that John will also have things to say about 12. I suspect all of us could. Emanuela?
Yeah, well, official statistics was no different from other sectors in society. We were all affected. Our continuity of operation was obviously challenged by the restrictions to mobility that were inherent in the pandemic situation. Particularly, the lockdown meant that, let's say, field work, collection of data through surveys, particularly face-to-face interviews, which is still used in many countries for some statistical collection, was not possible. So that triggered a reaction. And I would like to point out a couple of things. First, the reaction was not done country by country, but there was a very heavy and strong coordination and request for peer-to-peer support at the level of the European Statistical System, which is the cooperative that generates European statistics. So the combination of Eurostat and the member states' statistical organization. This cooperation also led to, for example, quickly delivering methodological notes and guidance on how to tackle cases like incomplete collection of data, missing data, and handle this through adequate statistical methods. Then the use of new data sources or innovative data sources came to the picture. Many countries basically filled the gaps that they had in the regular collection using a variety of different sources, from aggregate and anonymized credit card information in some countries. I mentioned mobile network operator data, so telecom data, data that were scraped from the internet. There are several examples of what was done, and typically there was a mix of, let's say, traditional and non-traditional sources put into the picture, and obviously that was, again, requiring some methodological work. But I would also like to say that the use of administrative data was particularly helpful in filling some of the information gaps. And all these things would have not been possible without the investment that the whole system had made in exploring all these data sets and methods in the previous years, which is a lesson that we take home from the crisis. On the one hand, we, let's say, benefit from the collaboration across the members of the European Statistical System, because we can learn from each other quickly on how to harmonize responses, particularly in crisis times. But also, there are, let's say, investments that we can make in advance that would prepare us for crises like this, or perhaps a next crisis that may always loom around the corner of a different type, and be ready, let's say, with the right type of investment that we need to continue to put in place. And this is why it is so important and critical for us to continuously innovate, because it's really an existential question. It's innovating to operate. It's not innovating for the sake of being novel or, let's say, having the latest product in terms of research. Thanks.
And John, I believe you had something to say in this area.
Yeah, just to complement what Emanuele rightly said, actually, as in many walks of life, I think the pandemic has accelerated work and trends which were already ongoing, but which had to be really sped up during the pandemic to deal with the challenges. I think in the coming months and years, the challenge will be to learn the lessons and to keep the access to the data and to keep using these new data sources which we had under pandemic circumstances. So I think that will be a big challenge for statisticians, to be able to cement that type of work and build on it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to do a question now that I can answer, I think. There's a question: as many people were suddenly more interested in statistical data, how much traffic has the database gained since the beginning of the pandemic? And there we were actually looking at some figures just the other day, because we were looking at figures that are quoted in our management plan. In fact, there hasn't been any spiky growth For some years, we've seen steady growth in the usage of our database and our other tools, and that continued through the pandemic. We're continuing to grow steadily in the number of downloads that are made from our database and so on. We've got 5 minutes left. We've got 2 more questions I can see. One is potentially very long, and there's one. Okay, I'm going to start with the longer one, and we'll see how we go. But perhaps I'm going to pose this to John, because I know, and this is an area which I know he's been active in the past, and as a man who has to manage a number of real data sets. So how can you be sure that the data that countries, entities give you are real? How are you verifying this? And John, can you give the sort of shorter answer to this?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think we have to be realistic here. We can't send statisticians to check every single entity reporting. What we can do is use different techniques to do this. One aspect, of course, is the types of data that we're getting. If the data come from administrative or other types of sources that we've been discussing today, then that obviously means that we're collecting them, and they were collected for another purpose, and that purpose may actually already be audited and checked and so on. If we're looking at more traditional statistical sources, clearly there may be a legal requirement to reply or not. I think as Christophe and Simon mentioned at some point, it is a question about checking the data in aggregate, checking plausibility, checking revisions in the data and the trends. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is to make sure that when the data are collected at member state level, that everybody is following the same definitions and the same type of methodological approach. And that's one of the big things that we need to make sure, is that, you know, the entities are reporting on a common basis, so we don't inadvertently introduce non-comparability or problems into the data. That's most I can say in a couple of minutes, but this is an answer which could go on for an hour.
Yeah, I'll add before I'm gonna pass over to Simon and Christophe, who said they can give. Simon in particular said he could give a concrete example, but I'm also going to mention. I mean, I mentioned in my presentation the peer reviews, which are against quality standards, and their independent assessing body will make a report, make recommendations, say where they think we are or aren't up to scratch, and that's done for all the statistical offices. And many statistics publish regular quality reports, which are available on our website, where they give an assessment of the quality of the data. The published reports, they're often made to the European Parliament or to the Commission, Council and Parliament, and yeah. So actually, we are running very short of time. I think. I'm just gonna pass one over to Emanuela. There's a question. One problem with data sets is knowing which version was used over time, e.g. when doing comparative analysis. Is there somehow a reference for releases? Important for reproducibility. I mean, Emanuela, can you say something about that, vintages?
Yeah, I can point to the future, because this is an area where we need to do a bit better and more. Producing the different versions of the database, particularly allowing people to compare revisions. It is available for some of the data sets, particularly for the macroeconomic statistics, but it's not as, let's say, extended as some of the users would like to. So this is part, in fact, of our reflection on how to boost the dissemination infrastructure and to provide, let's say, meaningful information. Obviously, there is also a limit, because if you put too many versions of whenever, let's say, a new version, whenever there is a change in the figures, you will end up having tons of data that will be difficult to consult. But the point is taken that this is something that, particularly for research purposes, should be extended beyond the current macroeconomic indicators which are presenting these revisions. Thanks.
Okay, I think we are more or less running out of time, so I am going to sort of call a halt to it now. I'm sorry that we have missed one or two questions, but I think, you know, we've done the best we can with the time, and we don't want to overrun the time. I'd like to say thank you to our four presenters, John, Simon, Christoph, and Emanuela, for taking time out to come and talk to us. I'd like to thank everybody who listened in and everybody who posed questions. We may try and I'll talk to Anna Maria, who's been running Slido, and maybe we can put some answers up on Slido. I'm not sure how we can do it, but we'll look into whether we can continue to answer questions. We will continue this series of webinars. There will be more coming in the future. Our aim is approximately to do one a month. We try and pick the subjects that we think are important and interesting, but equally, if there's something you'd like us to talk about in this format, let us know and we'll see if we can slot it in. Otherwise, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to everybody who asked questions. And hopefully you found it informative. Thank you.